Well, thanks so much, Sean. Sean himself has made a major contribution to the integration of social and political history. I guess I can't quite say that he's integrated military history yet, but that may actually be next. And if it is, I look forward to learning from him as I have learned from him in the courses that we have co-taught, graduate seminars over these many years at Princeton University. When the American Civil War began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, the United States President, Abraham Lincoln, was far less prepared for his task of commander-in-chief than was his Southern adversary. Jefferson Davis had graduated from West Point. He had commanded a regiment that fought courageously in the Mexican War, and he had served as an outstanding Secretary of War in the Franklin Pierce administration in the 1850s. Lincoln's only military experience had come back in 1832, when he was captain of a militia unit that saw no action in the Black Hawk War. During Lincoln's one term in Congress, he made a speech in 1848 mocking his military career. "Did you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm a military hero? I fought, bled, and came away after charges upon the wild onions and a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes." So when President Lincoln called state militia into federal service on April 15, 1861, to put down what he called combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he faced a steep learning curve as commander-in-chief. He worked hard at the task. His experience as a largely self-taught lawyer with a keen analytical mind who had once mastered Euclidean geometry on his own for mental exercise enabled him to learn on the job. He read and absorbed works on military history and strategy. He observed the successes and failures of his military commanders and drew apt conclusions. He made mistakes and learned from them. He applied his large quotient of common sense to slice through the obfuscations of military and excuses of military subordinates. By 1862, his grasp of strategy and operations was firm enough almost to justify the overstated but not entirely wrong conclusion of historian T. Harry Williams, who more than half a century now wrote a work that has become a classic called Lincoln and His Generals. Williams wrote, "Lincoln stands out as a great war president, probably the greatest in our history, and a great natural strategist, a better one than any of his generals." The one thing I might disagree with Williams about in that quotation is a great natural strategist. I don't think that Lincoln was a great natural strategist. He actually had to work very hard on learning, mastering strategy. As a commander-in-chief in time of war, a president performs or oversees 3 and possibly 4 functions in diminishing order of direct activity. First, policy. Second, national strategy. Third, military strategy. And fourth, operations. Neither Lincoln nor anyone else defined these functions in a systematic way during the Civil War. If they had, their definitions might have sounded something like this. Policy refers to war aims, the political goals of the nation in time of war. National strategy refers to mobilization of the political, economic, diplomatic, and psychological, as well as military resources of the nation to achieve those war aims. Military strategy, pretty clear and obvious, I think, refers to plans for the employment of armed forces to win victories that will further those political goals. Operations, which presidents, commanders-in-chief rarely get involved in, but Lincoln occasionally did, as I'll point out later. Operations refer to the actual organization, logistics, and movements of armies in particular campaigns to carry out the goals, the purposes of military strategy. So let me look at each one of these functions in more detail. As president of the nation and leader of his party, as well as commander-in-chief, Lincoln was principally responsible for shaping, defining, articulating national strategy. From first to last, that policy was national policy, I should say, not national strategy. From first to last, that policy was preservation of the United States as one nation, indivisible, and as a republic based on majority rule, the majority rule that had put Lincoln in office. In May 1861, he explained that the central idea pervading this struggle is the necessity that is upon us of proving that popular government is not an absurdity. We must settle this question now, whether in a free government the minority have the right to break up the government whenever they choose. On another occasion, Lincoln defined secession as the essence of anarchy, because if one state may secede at will, so may any other until there is no government and no nation. In the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln offered his most eloquent statement of national policy. The war was a test whether the nation conceived in 1776 might live or would perish from the earth. This issue of national sovereignty over a union of all the states was non-negotiable. No compromise between a sovereign United States and a separately sovereign Confederate States was possible. This issue, Lincoln said in 1864, after more than 3 years of bloody war, this issue is distinct, simple, and inflexible. It is an issue which can only be tried by war, that's of course where I got my title, and decided by victory. The next level of Lincoln's duty as commander-in-chief was to mobilize the means to achieve that policy by winning the war. The President, of course, shared with Congress and key cabinet members the tasks of raising, organizing, and maintaining and sustaining an army and navy, preventing foreign intervention in the conflict, maintaining public support for the war. But no matter how much these functions of national strategy required maximum effort at all levels of government and society, the ultimate responsibility was the President's in his dual roles as head of government and commander-in-chief. And this responsibility, as Lincoln, I think, realized better than anyone else, was as much a political as a military one, especially in a civil war whose origins lay in an internal political conflict and was precipitated by political decisions. The decision of Southern states to secede in response to Lincoln's election, the decision by the Lincoln administration not to recognize the legitimacy of that secession, and so on. Although Lincoln never read Karl von Clausewitz's famous treatise Vom Kriege on war, it hadn't yet been translated into English in Lincoln's time, and although Lincoln had many talents, reading German was not one of them. Lincoln's actions were a consummate expression of Clausewitz's central argument, which in translation goes like this. The political objective is the goal, war is the means of reaching it, and means can never be considered in isolation from their purpose. Therefore, it is clear that war should never be thought of as something autonomous, but always as an instrument of policy. Some professional men tended to think of war as something autonomous and deplored the intrusion of political considerations into military matters. Take the notable, in some people's view, notorious examples of what were called political generals that existed on both sides, but were more prevalent, I think, on the Union side in the Civil War. Lincoln appointed numerous prominent politicians with little or no military training or experience to the rank of brigadier or major general. Some of them received these appointments so early in the war that by seniority they subsequently outranked professional West Point educated officers. Lincoln also commissioned important ethnic leaders as generals with little regard to their military merits. Some of these political and ethnic generals proved to be incompetent on the battlefield. And as one of the consummate professionals, General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck, put it in a kind of exasperated letter to William T. Sherman, another professional who didn't have much time for politicians,